We will now call the subcommittee to order. Good morning, everyone. Today we welcome Secretary Ben Carson from the Department of Housing and Urban Development to discuss the fiscal year 2018 budget request. Mr. Secretary, I know that I don't have to tell you that you have one of the most difficult and important jobs in Washington. You've said several times that HUD can and should provide a ladder of opportunity to those hardworking families that can attain social and economic upward mobility and pursue the American dream. HUD's mission is to create strong, sustainable, inclusive communities and frankly, quality, affordable homes for folks. Achieving this mission is an ambitious challenge. HUD has many diverse programs, thousands of entities that carry out the programs, and millions of citizens who receive benefits and who, in many cases, depend on HUD. And frankly, HUD is a very large financial institution as well. Jeannie Mae and the Federal Housing Administration together hold a portfolio of $3 trillion. And safeguarding the financial health of these institutions is essential for, frankly, our national economic health. HUD is requesting a total of $40.7 billion in new budgetary resources in fiscal year 2018, which is 15% below 2017. The budget request proposes to eliminate a number of programs that are, for example, some of those are important to our mayors, and I'm sure you've heard and we'll hear from them as well, cities, towns, and, for example, community development block grant programs, the home investment partnership programs in particular are some of those. So I'm sure, Mr. Secretary, that we're going to have a robust conversation, a discussion about these programs and many other things. And again, this is a long process that I look forward to, all of us look forward to working with you on. In addition, the budget includes cost-saving proposals and reforms across its rental assistance programs. Now, however, most of those reforms are outside this committee's jurisdiction and must be addressed first by the authorizing committee. Some of the reforms would provide public housing authorities benefits, such as flexibilities and regulatory relief from administrative burdens. The budget would also set a mandatory minimum rent and increase tenant rent contributions, and it would suspend rent increases for private-owned units. Mr. Secretary, your budget states that these policies would result in additional resources that would allow more homes to be available to more households. You know, Mr. Secretary, because you were recently in the district that I'm privileged to represent, that I represent low-income and urban areas, and I support the spirit of HUD's mission and the desire to operate more efficiently, obviously, and to do more. My mayors, my city council, my community leaders, and constituents all rely on HUD programs. And this is why it's so important that we work together to explore the implications of any reforms and cost-saving proposals in our communities and to our communities. It is not the intent to impose additional undue burdens onto our most at-risk populations or to reduce our affordable housing stocks or its conditions. That said, I agree that it is critical that HUD be a good steward of its resources, as nearly all of what HUD oversees helps the most vulnerable in our society. So yet I continue to receive reports that HUD has tremendous difficulty with basic management. The number of seriousness of those negative Inspector General reports is astonishing. I know that you share that concern. Poor financial controls, possible Anti-Deficiency Act violations, lax program oversight, major risks to IT systems, gaps in cybersecurity, the list goes on and on. These core management challenges have plagued HUD now for 24 years, a quarter of a century. The HUD IG has indicated that the problem boils down to lack of leadership or management attention issues. And unfortunately, those are challenges, Mr. Secretary, that you are inheriting. And so we're grateful that you have decided to take on this very difficult task. So, Mr. Secretary, I ask you to take a fresh look at these core issues and prioritize them. I know you are interested in doing that. I want to work with you, with the administration, to make HUD the high-quality, high-functioning organization, you know, that it has to be to oversee these crucially important programs. Mr. Secretary, you know, you come from humble beginnings and are exceedingly sensitive to people who are experiencing poverty and hardship. Together, we have to work together to strive to make HUD programs more effective, more efficient for the American people. I look forward to working with you, sir, as we make the hard choices, and they are hard choices necessary to meet our nation's housing and economic development needs, all while obviously being accountable to the taxpayer. Before we get to your opening statement, Mr. Secretary, I want to recognize the ranking member of this subcommittee. The gentleman from North Carolina and I have developed a great relationship. With that, Mr. Price, you are recognized for your opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, too, look forward to working with you as we navigate this challenging budget cycle. And I want to join you in welcoming our Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Dr. Ben Carson. Welcome, sir, to our subcommittee. Nearly all of HUD's affordable housing and community development programs are at this moment underfunded and have been underfunded compared to demonstrated need. I think we have to honestly acknowledge that at the outset. These are programs that serve some of the most vulnerable people in our country, the elderly, the disabled, children, veterans, single parents trying to make ends meet. It is not an exaggeration to say that America, the most prosperous nation in the world, is in the midst of an affordable housing crisis. More and more families are struggling to pay rent. Meanwhile, only 1 of 4 people eligible for federal rental assistance can actually receive it because of funding constraints. We shouldn't be comfortable with this reality. In fact, it should force us to ask tough questions about our values and priorities. Unfortunately, the Department's fiscal 2018 budget request before us today would make these daunting problems even worse. The request includes $36.3 billion in funding, offset by $9.5 billion in receipts. The total budget authority provided in the request would be lower than last year's level by about $7.5 billion, 17%. Since more than 3/4 of HUD's budget is devoted towards simply maintaining current residents in housing, cuts of this magnitude will disproportionately affect community development and other targeted housing programs. For example, community development. Let's look at that. A flexible source of funding for hundreds of urban and rural communities to help meet the needs of low and moderate income people. A program that is remarkable for its bipartisan support over many years. That program is proposed for complete elimination. The home program, complete elimination. That's the largest federal block grant to state and local governments designed exclusively to produce affordable housing for low-income families. My colleagues and I have heard from hundreds of local elected officials and housing practitioners that these programs play a critical role. They're the most flexible programs in your portfolio. They play a critical role in helping address affordable housing shortages and other pressing community needs. Mr. Secretary, in your Senate confirmation, you spoke about addressing housing instability and poverty in what you called a comprehensive manner. And that would include providing greater access to health care, economic opportunity, so that there's a kind of comprehensive approach with people in need. And I think it's fair to say that we widely share those goals, but I, for the life of me, cannot find in this budget any evidence of taking that vision seriously. It's especially troubling that your budget would eliminate the Choice Neighborhoods initiative. This program helps transform aging public housing developments into vibrant mixed-income communities, and it does leverage non-federal funding to promote small businesses, to bring other services into the community. It's the very epitome of a comprehensive approach. The best example in your portfolio, yet you are proposing to totally eliminate it. Totally eliminate Choice Neighborhoods. Even the Self-Help Home Ownership Opportunity Program, SHOP, and Section 4 capacity building would be zeroed out. SHOP is used by Habitat for Humanity, other nonprofits, to help create affordable housing. It has a huge multiplier effect in the kind of funding and the kind of support it brings forward. They use the sweat equity model in Habitat, but any Habitat, local or national, leader will tell you that SHOP is essential essential seed money for what they're doing. Same for Section 4, which expands their capabilities and their technical expertise. Finally, the National Housing Trust Fund, that doesn't even constitute discretionary budget authority, yet you're proposing that it be eliminated. This is a real head-scratcher because these are mandatory funds. They're derived from contributions by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. The Housing Trust Fund has only recently been tapped by the states, but it's already being used to finance the development and rehab of affordable housing for home-income people. Why would we want to see that go away? These sweeping program eliminations, I must say, fail to demonstrate the surgical precision, if I may say so, that we might expect from you. They're the equivalent of taking a meat axe to the HUD budget, which has already faced steep reductions in recent years. This budget request says that state and local governments should pick up the slack, but how? How? It's incomprehensible, it's unacceptable. And there are many reductions, as opposed to outright eliminations. There are many, many damaging reductions in this budget. I won't go into them in detail, except just to note that tenant-based Section 8 is cut by 5%. We're talking here about 265,000 people nationwide back out onto the streets. Public housing cut across the boards, massive cuts. Housing opportunities for people with AIDS, 7% cut. Homeless assistance grants, 6% cut. Housing counseling, 15%. The list goes on. Without sustained increases in funding commensurate with need, people will lose housing, and they will lose the supportive services that they rely upon. I'd also want to register my concerns with the department's so-called rent reforms, which would essentially shift HUD programs' costs onto residents, raising minimum rents, eliminating utility allowance reimbursements, ending higher payments for new enhanced vouchers. These could have serious repercussions for people who rely on housing assistance. If changes are needed here, that's best left to the authorizing committees. They shouldn't be loaded onto a budget proposal. And why on earth roll out these reforms first in places like project-based rental assistance, the 202 housing program, rental housing program for the elderly, 811 program for the disabled? Why on earth start there? These are programs that serve vulnerable elderly and disabled individuals. It just sounds counterintuitive at best and just terribly mistaken at worst. As I said at the beginning, the current state of housing in America should force us to ask tough questions. Unfortunately, looking at this budget proposal raises many unsettling questions. Does this administration care about the most vulnerable among us? And have you been appointed? Do you find yourself in this position only to preside over the demise of HUD? I think that is not too severe a question to pose. Before I close, I want to remind my colleagues that although in the beginning of June we still have no budget resolution, no top line, although it's the beginning of June, we still have no budget resolution, no top line spending number, no subcommittee allocations, and the debt limit is rapidly approaching. So without another bipartisan budget deal, we'll also be forced to cope with the devastating return of sequestration. And of course, the numbers proposed in the Trump budget are below sequestration for HUD and for other critical agencies. In the past years, we know this has been a recipe for disaster. It's simply a formula for not being able to appropriate and having a crisis at the end of the fiscal year. We do not need, our country does not need this kind of breakdown this year. We should anticipate this. We should do a budget deal. We should have a more comprehensive approach that will let us write our appropriations bills on budget and on time. Mr. Secretary, I look forward to hearing your testimony today. We have some really important questions to explore. We've got to work together to ensure that vital housing and community development programs are adequately funded and continue to address the crying needs that we see in our communities. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Price. Now it is a deep honor for me to be able to recognize the leader of this committee, of the full committee, the chairman of the full committee, the gentleman from New Jersey, Chairman Frelinghuysen.
Thank you, Chairman Diaz-Balart and Mr. Price and Ms. Lowy and I. We all welcome you here to appropriations process. Today's hearing is an important part of the oversight duties of the committee. Now that we've formally received the administration's budget request, yours in particular, this committee will give it a thorough analysis. Today's hearing is part of the process we follow to determine the best use of taxpayers' dollars. After all, the power of the purse lies in this building. It's the constitutional duty of Congress to make these types of spending decisions. As the chairman said, HUD provides critical resources to some of our most vulnerable populations in our country in need of housing, including seniors, homeless veterans, and those with disabilities, and those with very limited incomes. I'm sure you'd agree, Mr. Secretary, it's completely unacceptable that even one veteran in our country should be reduced to homelessness as they struggle with post-traumatic stress syndrome or drug and alcohol abuse or a lot of other things. In my neck of the woods, we have an incredible facility at the Lyons VA Hospital in northern New Jersey, which provides 62 affordable housing units to homeless and at-risk vets. Of these 62 units, 50 are supported by HUD VASH vouchers. So we need to take a look at that, make sure that we make the right decisions on their behalf. Throughout my time in Congress, I've been a strong advocate for those with disabilities. As has been said by others on the panel here, your budget proposal calls for cutting housing for persons with disabilities, the Section 11 program, by 18%. I think we're all curious to understand how the department plans to serve those families given such a cut. And like others, I'm concerned about the proposed cut of $1 billion to Section 8 tenant-based rental assistance. And I'd like to know how the department plans to honor all of existing vouchers with such a sharp reduction. And lastly, I join with my colleagues in being concerned about, and we're all concerned about waste, fraud, and abuse, but the fate of the community development block grants. These have had, I think you know well, bipartisan support for decades. In fact, were created under President Nixon's administration to sort of give power back to the people to make decisions locally, to focus on community needs. So I share with my colleagues my concern about a lot of the programs you're reducing, and I look forward to hearing your answers. And may I say I will be working very closely with the chairman and the ranking member to make sure we get a budget across the finish line for all of our departments that meets the needs of the American people. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's also a privilege to be able to now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, the gentlewoman from New York, Mrs. Lowy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to thank Chairman Diaz-Balart and Ranking Member Price for holding this hearing, and Secretary Carson, thank you so much for joining us. Simply put, Mr. Secretary, your budget is inadequate at best and unconscionable at worst. It would eliminate community development block grants, which Congress funded at more than $3 billion in the recently passed bipartisan FY17 omnibus. The Home Investment Partnerships, which leverages federal funding to build affordable housing and receive bipartisan support for a $950 million investment. Your budget would also cause great suffering and harm, including cutting housing opportunities with persons with AIDS, HOPWA, by $26 million, increase homelessness by slashing homeless assistance grants by $130 million, and rental assistance by $64.9 million. Decrease lead hazardous control, a program that I've been working on for a very long time, but the need is still clear to most everyone. It keeps our children safe from lead-based paint and other hazards in their home. That was a cut of $15 million. Secretary Carson, there is no justification for this drastic approach. And given your public statements, I have really serious doubts about your grasp of the difficulties that millions of Americans face and the resources available to give people a hand up. I say that because when I worked in the state with Marion Cuomo a long time ago, I ran the anti-poverty program, and most people want a hand up. They don't want a hand out. So cutting these programs is just unconscionable. You have suggested that the government has made things too comfortable for people living in public housing, and that poverty is merely, quote, a state of mind. In fact, I visit all our public housing, and one of the major problems we have, people are there too long because there isn't enough affordable housing. So in many instances, we can't move people out of public housing into affordable housing. Not enough resources to do that either. Perhaps you haven't really studied the people your department is assisting to realize that this budget would result in millions of Americans, many of whom are senior citizens, veterans, children, people with disabilities, and the working poor living in homeless shelters or on the streets. These cuts, Mr. Secretary, don't exist in a vacuum and would end up costing taxpayers even more than if we invest now in the very types of assistance you propose to severely cut or entirely eliminate. Housing must play a big role in strengthening and growing the middle class, empowering hardworking Americans, providing economic opportunity for all Americans. And I just want to say, Mr. Secretary, I know you just assumed these responsibilities. I really look forward to a productive discussion. I hope we can have it today, and I hope we will continue the discussion because we're people, Democrats, Republicans, on an appropriations, we really try to work together. So I hope you'll be listening to our concerns, which comes really from the bottom of our hearts and based on the experience many of us have had in our communities. And I do hope that working together we can make some changes. Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mrs. Lowy. Mr. Secretary, your full testimony will be included in the record. We look forward to now hearing from you, and so, sir, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Delighted to hear the passion and the compassion from all the speakers because that means it would be much easier to work with you. Thank you for inviting me to discuss the Department of Housing and Human Development's proposed budget for fiscal year 2018. The first Secretary of HUD, Robert C. Weaver, said that we must look for human solutions, not just policies and programs. I want our efforts to assist those in need, but also to support a path to self-sufficiency. At the same time, we are keenly focused on efficiency throughout the agency with a mindset of doing more with less. Of course, we continue our mission. The budget reflects the President's commitment to support HUD's critical functions, such as to provide rental assistance to low-income and vulnerable households, to promote decent, safe, and affordable housing for Americans, and to have access to home ownership, and to help work-eligible families achieve independence, freedom from regulations and bureaucracy, and the ability to govern themselves. The President's 2018 budget also continues to provide rental assistance for 4.6 million households, while recognizing a greater role for state and local governments and the private sector to address community and economic needs. We also support borrowers through the FHA on their path to home ownership. This is very important for first-time home buyers and those on limited incomes. But again, it's a part of the path forward to wealth creation through investments, equity, and responsibility. For 2018, the budget proposes a set of policies in its core rental assistance programs to reduce costs. At the same time, we continue to assist current residents, encourage work, and promote self-sufficiency. The budget also seeks to provide administrative flexibilities and to streamline the complex and administratively burdensome calculation of income and rent. I'm particularly interested in creating healthy homes. As a physician, I can tell you any amount of lead in our children is too much. The budget promotes healthy and lead-safe homes by providing $130 million for the mitigation of lead-based paint and other hazards in low-income homes, especially those in which children reside. We also fund enforcement, education, and research activities to further support this goal, all of which contributes to lower health care costs and increased productivity. Turning to community development and the homeless population, this is where our humanity must be evident and our commitment steadfast. Our programs must reach out, and so must our hearts. We must be compassionate yet wise. HUD's homeless assistance grants serve vulnerable individuals and families who are homeless or at risk of becoming homeless through a wide variety of service and housing interventions, including homelessness prevention, emergency shelter, rapid rehousing, transitional housing, and permanent supportive housing. These programs are the vehicle used by HUD to promote evidence-based approaches, leading to more effective use of resources. The budget would provide $2.25 billion for homeless assistance grants and supports the renewal of over 240,000 beds. HUD will continue to work closely with our state, local, and nonprofit partners who are close to this issue to help continue to find efficiencies and to work to end homelessness. We continue to make progress in eliminating chronic homelessness. The American housing market must remain stable, secure, and safe. FHA mortgage insurance programs, along with the mortgage-backed security guarantee of Ginnie Mae, will continue as a path for responsible home buyers to have access to credit so they can build wealth through home ownership. The budget includes $400 billion in loan guarantee authority for FHA mortgage insurance programs and $500 billion in authority for Ginnie Mae secondary market guarantees. These programs will generate approximately $9.5 billion in receipts in 2018. In summary, the President's budget is fiscally responsible and meets the requirements of my department. It reflects commitment to fiscal responsibility while supporting critical functions. It also administers programs to help low-income and vulnerable households. It helps work-eligible families achieve self-sufficiency and supports a path for borrowers to upward mobility. Thank you for your time today, and I look forward to answering your questions and, most importantly, working with this committee to find appropriate solutions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Secretary, your, as I mentioned before, and as you mentioned, your budget represents a 15% reduction from FY17, the enacted level, and it bases that funding level in part on rental reforms that depend on changes to statute, which, by the way, as I mentioned before, that's outside of our jurisdiction, of the subcommittee's jurisdiction. So it's going to depend on the authorizers working with you and buying in on these issues. So just what's your plan to engage with the appropriate committees of jurisdiction? If you have any idea of timelines, that kind of things for these reform to receive full consideration and then being implemented. And then, because here's my concern, let's assume for argument's sake that if some of those things are not done, would that require a modification of your budget, or what alternatives then would you be willing to look at? Just kind of throw that in your direction.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for the incredible work that you've been doing in your district. I've had a chance to visit there with you, and I really appreciate that. The authorizers have, in fact, requested that we meet with them, and we're extremely happy to do that and making arrangements to do so. You know, this is very much a collaborative process, and, you know, in the multitude of counselors is safety.
Let me go now to the community development block grant issue and also the home issue. We are obviously hearing great concerns from local leaders on the proposed elimination of CDBG and home programs. Is the administration contemplating ways to address the loss of, you know, that reduction of community or loss of community development and affordable housing funding? For example, will there be a potential housing and community development funding portion in the infrastructure proposal? You know, this subcommittee deals with both infrastructure and housing. So, you know, how would you respond to that, and what do you think the administration is looking at?
Certainly, we have been advocating for housing to be included in the infrastructure bill, and things do seem to be moving in that direction, but obviously I can't comment on that because it hasn't been formulated yet. You know, the Community Development Block Grant Program, in its original intent, was really to provide flexibility to state and local governments to be able to use federal fundings in the way that they saw most appropriate for the community development in their particular area. And that was a good mission. Particularly worked well with the mission of HUD to provide safe and affordable housing with a particular focus on those individuals of low income. Over the course of time, there has been significant mission creep, and only about 25% of CDBG dollars are used for housing. It doesn't mean that the other things aren't good things, but, you know, about 15% is used for state and local administrative purposes. And we have to say, within the budgetary constraints that we have, what is critical? We have to prioritize, very much like a family who discovers that there are 12 major problems with their house, but they only have enough money to fix 6 of them. How are they going to prioritize? And it's really hard to say to the other 6, well, you're going to have to wait. But the fact of the matter is, the main purpose here is to be able to provide safe and appropriate shelter for millions and millions of American households. And therefore, that goes to the top of our priority list. And again, that doesn't mean that other things are not important, but it is critical that we be able to do that. It's also important to recognize that there's over $8 billion in the CDBG pipeline, $3 billion of which was appropriated for the 2017 cycle. We are looking at ways to make sure that that money will be used in the most efficient and effective way, as we are with all the pipeline monies for the different programs.
Mr. Secretary, I try to lead by example. My time is up, so now I will recognize Mr. Price.
Mr. Secretary, there have been reports, I'm sure you're aware, that the White House has ordered agencies, including yours, to ignore Democratic oversight requests. Now, the administration seems to be saying that Democratic oversight has no legitimacy, that oversight is only the prerogative of the majority party. That seems to be the position. And if so, it's a new level of partisanship that is unprecedented, totally unacceptable, and can only worsen our gridlock. So I want to ask you some questions about this and the way it affects you. What is the policy of your department with respect to responses to congressional inquiries? More specifically, do you have a policy or do you have guidance that would prohibit or delay responses to ranking members of congressional committees or subcommittees of jurisdiction? Thirdly, is there a policy or guidance that would prohibit or delay responses to Democratic members of Congress? And finally, if such policies or guidance are in place to prohibit or delay responses to ranking members or to all Democratic members, was such a policy developed in consultation with the White House or the Office of Management and Budget?
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member, and particularly for your extreme concern about your constituents. As far as transparency is concerned with the operations at HUD, as far as I'm concerned, that is high priority, and it has nothing to do with the person's political party. I would be extremely opposed to withholding information based on party. And, you know, one of the reasons that I accepted this position is because I was horrified by the level of partisanship that exists in our country. You know, a house divided against itself cannot stand. And the problems that the poor in our country face are not partisan issues. And I'm delighted that many have expressed the desire to work together. I will certainly be doing that and will not be withholding any information.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear you say that. I was glad to hear your colleague, Secretary John Kelly, make a similar declaration yesterday. I want to ask you to be a bit more specific, though. Of course, we appreciate the offer of a cooperation. We're talking here, though, about inquiries, requests that sometimes take a very specific form and that require extensive follow-up, that require a timely response. Are you saying that when those responses come from the minority side as well as the majority side, that you would give them you would give them equal priority? In other words, you would not honor what the administration seems to be saying about oversight being only a majority prerogative?
Yeah, I hope that's a misinterpretation of what the administration is saying, but I can tell you at HUD, we will treat all inquiries equally.
Have you had any directives to the contrary?
I have not had any such directives.
All right. I will take you at your word, and we appreciate that commitment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I suspect I'm the only one on the panel that actually has ever met Secretary Weaver. He once he was a friend of my late father's, and I ran into him on several occasions, and he often said, "I'd be happy to come up to your congressional district to be helpful, or stay away from your congressional district if it would not be helpful." But he was a good man, and he was committed to the same endeavor you are here. I'm concerned about the fate of people with disabilities in your budget proposal. Certainly, Section 811. I'm particularly concerned about Section 8, those who are non-elderly, oftentimes in the Section 8 program. Older Americans, I won't say crowd out those with disabilities, developmental disability, mental disabilities. I want to make sure, and may I just say for the record, you may not know it, but in that non-elderly area, there's actually something called Frelinghuysen vouchers. And I have amount of pride in making sure that people with a variety of disabilities continue to get the services they need and the housing they need. Would you talk more about your commitment, your department's commitment to those with a variety of disabilities? There's a broad spectrum, but certainly the optics of cutting $1 billion here and 18% out of Section 811, those are not very good optics.
Sure. Well, thank you. Thank you for particularly your concern about the disabled. As you know, I spent 36 years in medicine, most of that as a neurosurgeon and most of that as a pediatric neurosurgeon, had to deal with a lot of disability. And
That's exactly why I'm, knowing of your background, I think it's important for you to.
so obviously I'm going to fight for that group of people, like I'm going to fight for everybody, but with particular interest. What we have discovered, as particularly in the whole rental reform package, is that we're able to find a lot of inefficiencies and improve the way that services are rendered. In the continuum of care for permanent supportive housing, we're getting basically 14.8% more households per dollar spent on that program, just through examining what was going on, the waste and inefficiencies. That's being applied to virtually all of the programs. And again, for those families or those individuals who have particular hardships, we have waivers available for them. So any changes to the program that adversely affect them in a way that would impact upon their ability to maintain our goal of safe housing and secure housing, we have waivers.
Well, respectfully, and I know my time is limited, individuals with disabilities, families with disabilities, I'm sure we're all focused on inefficiencies, but in many of their cases, the potential for sharp reductions would put those families and individuals in a very bad position. So I hope that as we move towards a completion of this bill, that you will hopefully, working with both the ranking member and the chairman,
Sure.
Address the needs of this very diverse and important community.
We will not allow that community to be adversely affected.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Lowy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, while thousands in Flint were tragically exposed to lead through drinking water, historically, paint has been the most prevalent source of lead exposure, and much of the success we've had in reducing exposure to lead has come from a partnership between HUD, the EPA, and the CDC, each providing expertise and resources. In the fiscal year 2017 omnibus, Congress provided an increase to $145 million, and just a month later, we received your proposal to cut that bipartisan investment by $15 million. Your own budget estimates that similar lead hazard control programs have a return on investment of at least 17 to 1 at a value of over $30 billion. Given the tremendous needs, why do you propose this cut? And at the current levels, how many grant applicants are turned away due to the lack of funding?
Okay. Thank you for your concern about lead. That's something that obviously I'm very concerned about, having worked for 36 years in Baltimore and seeing the effects of that lead exposure. It's approximately 310,000 children per year are adversely affected, and those are the ones that we know about. You know, we have altered the considerations for lead action to make them consistent with the CDC at 5 micrograms per deciliter, helping to establish a national standard for the first time. In terms of the funding, based on the previous 2 cycles, we suggested a $20 million increase. So from $110 million up to $130 million. At that time, we didn't know that you would recommend $145 million, which we will happily accept, but we didn't have the ability to do that at the time of the budget. So that does not reflect disconcern. It reflects just the opposite, and we feel very strongly about that.
Well, that's good news. Thank you very, very much, and I look forward to working with you on that. In the couple of minutes I have left, I wanted to talk about the SHOP program, which awards grants to national and regional nonprofits to purchase home sites and develop or improve housing for those with low incomes. It's a really good program because I have visited them. The homeowners are required to put in sweat equity towards the construction of rehabilitation of their homes. And in fiscal year 2017, Congress funded SHOP at $10 million. We've heard from advocacy groups who would like to see the program funded at $15 million, not eliminated. Mr. Secretary, you've spoken about the importance of home ownership to our country and our economy. So why should we eliminate a program that increases home ownership among the low-income and first-time home buyers? And I also want to say SHOP grantees have raised a significant amount of private leverage, bringing in more than $2 billion of investment into communities. So when you take away the federal dollars, you take away the ability to leverage and create these investments. I'm hoping that we can work together on this program as well.
Well, I'd be delighted to work with you on the whole concept of home ownership. It's so critical, and it is the principal mechanism whereby family wealth is generated in this country. Again, we have to work within the constraints of what we have, but I'm always happy to work with you on that.
Well, I thank you so much. I'll even give you back 45 seconds. Working with you on these programs would really be a privilege, so I thank you very much for your commitment.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Lowy. Excuse me, Mr. Denton, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning. Mr. Secretary, thank you for your service to our country.
Thank you.
Just a few things. As others have already mentioned here on this panel, the President's budget does call for eliminating both the CDBG program and the home program, among others. In the communities that I represent, I've seen the importance of affordable housing developments and other programs that have been made possible through leveraging both CDBG and home funds. Just earlier this week, on Monday, actually, before I came down, I attended the grand opening of an affordable senior living center in Allentown, Pennsylvania, my hometown, that made use of home funds and federal housing vouchers to bring in private capital to finance this particular project. And as demonstrated by the project, federal funds can serve as a real catalyst and leverage private investment for development. And in its justification for limiting funding for CDBG and the home programs, the administration stated in part that it recognized that state and local governments are better positioned to address local community economic development needs, and that devolving affordable housing activities to state and local governments would be a more appropriate solution to addressing these challenges. And certainly I agree that state and local stakeholders should have the most control possible over their needs and decision-making. Eliminating these federal funds would seriously eliminate their ability to bring capital, to bring in private and state and local government investment for these important projects. So if these funds would be eliminated, how does the administration expect that states and localities would be able to attract the needed private investment for affordable housing and other projects? And while the budget states that the state and local governments should be the ones to address these challenges, it does not provide any sort of assistance, relief, or other mechanism to replace the programs taken away.
Thank you, sir. I would draw your attention to RAD.
To what? I'm sorry?
RAD, the rental assistance demonstration. Here is a program that does a tremendous amount of leveraging of public dollars at a national average of about 19-1, and is able to rehabilitate many of these multifamily public housing situations, convert others, and those are the kinds of things that we're very much behind. And again, I don't want to give people the impression that I don't like the things that have been done before. I think the effort that people have put into these and some of the benefits are very laudable. But we're working within a different framework here. And I know it's been talked about for years and years. Fiscal responsibility, we have to get on track. But compassion, I think, also involves thinking about future generations and what we are doing to them if we just continue to think about what's going on in the here and now. So I'm very happy to work with people on ways that we can use the funding that we do have, but it is absolutely essential that we do not allow the most vulnerable people in our society to be discarded and thrown out on the streets as we look at all the other programs.
I would agree, Mr. Secretary. I just want to convey to you the concerns that I've heard from the leaders in cities like Allentown, Bethlehem, and Lebanon, Pennsylvania, Republican and Democrat, that these two programs in particular are of real value to them. Another issue, too, that I'm very concerned about is the Housing Counseling Assistance Program, and that provides housing counseling services to homeowners and tenants both pre and post purchase, and can help struggling homeowners prevent foreclosure, assist them in avoiding difficulties in the first place. In the case of pre-purchase counseling, these services are able to teach a person to fish, so to speak, instead of only providing a single instance of monetary assistance, and the services have had a demonstrable positive impact for those who participated. In the wake of the national housing and foreclosure crisis, Congress created the National Foreclosure Mitigation Counseling Program in 2007 to provide counseling to struggling homeowners. Many entities that made use of these housing counseling funds also then received funding from the NFMC. And the country's obviously recovered quite a bit from the housing crisis, and the NFMC has been phased out. Bottom line is, I was encouraged to see that the funding had requested level funding with the Appropriations Act 2017 for the Housing Counseling Assistance Program. Could you please elaborate a little bit on the administration's decision to support funding for this particular program? And finally, do you think it may be prudent to increase funding for this program in light of the NFMC's winding down so that buyers are prepared for the responsibilities of homeownership and to avert a future crisis?
Mr. Secretary and Mr. Dent, I fear that we're going to have to get to that question later, just to make sure that, and I apologize to Mr. Dent. These are
the second round.
I had a dynamite answer for you.
I'm sure you would. There you
Here for
go.
the second round, yield back.
And thank you, Mr. Dent. Mr. Quigley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Speaking someone well acquainted with the medical issues, Doctor, I appreciate your being here. The HOPWA program, Housing Opportunities for Persons with HIV/AIDS, facing a 7% cut. Your reaction to that, just given the understanding of what the program means for Americans living with HIV. In Chicago, about 23,000 people are living with HIV in 2015. The viral suppression rate, for others, that means the viral load is so low that the person cannot transmit HIV, was 48% in Chicagoans. That's about 18% higher than the national average. We've worked hard to achieve this rate. It's interesting, a sample of persons who lived in HOPWA housing in Chicago, 66% were virally suppressed. That's much higher as well. You seem to be today merging passion, compassion, and efficiencies. The HOPWA program seems to be doing all those as well. Your reaction given that to the proposed cut?
Well, first of all, I am, along with you, happy to see the tremendous progress that has been made in the treatment of HIV/AIDS. And many people are able to lead completely normal lives now. So things are changing for the better in that sense. I had an opportunity on my listening tour to visit an at HOPWA facility. It was beautiful. The people there were extraordinarily happy. And one of the things that impressed me the most was the executors were telling me that at first there was a lot of opposition, and now they reached a point where they almost have to turn away people in the community who are trying to help. And that facility was built through public-private partnerships. Those are the kinds of things that represent sort of the new model. The old model was the government came in with a whole bunch of money and said, build this facility for people with AIDS, or build this facility for low-income people in this area, et cetera. The new model is The government seeds the program and then facilitates public-private partnerships by creating win-win situations. And I think that's going to provide much better footing for allowing people to develop to their full potential so that we don't actually need so much aid for people. But we have to lay the foundation to do that.
But according to your own agency, there are about 390,000 people eligible for HOPWA through this program that can currently only serve about 60,000 households, and a 7% cut only makes that worse.
And the same can be said about affordable housing in general. You know, we have 3 to 4 times as many people in need of it as we're able to provide. But if we continue along the same kinds of ways that we've been doing it for the last several years, we're just not we're treading water.
Well,
we need to do something that will expand.
Respectfully, though, you talked about priorities being those most vulnerable. Every study I've seen indicates that one of the most important factors in suppressing the viral load of HIV-positive Americans is stable housing, just as you would imagine, for a variety of reasons. So, to your earlier point, this seems to be working against helping those most vulnerable, most exposed, from a compassion point of view, but clearly from a dollars point of view. Because people who are HIV positive go off their medication, they are going to be an extraordinary cost as well, given that their treatment is upset and they're going to get sick.
I don't.
And they're going to potentially make others sick.
I don't disagree with you, but again, we're working within the pie is only so big. We need to make the pie bigger. If we can make the pie bigger, we can make more slices.
Well, now we're talking the same thing. We're making the pie bigger. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Vice Chairman, Mr. Joyce, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Secretary, pleasure to see you today. Thank you for being here. As you are well aware, many of the districts still see the effects of the housing crisis and are struggling to cope with the aftermath a decade later. A particular concern in my district is home foreclosures and subsequently vacant properties that have caused blight throughout once thriving communities. Cities end up owning a large percentage of these properties and therefore have the responsibility of maintaining or demolishing them. But this has proven overly burdensome, so these abandoned properties often remain vacant and in a dilapidated state. Consequently, they're devaluing nearby homes and serving as sanctuaries for criminal activity. Does your department have any plans to complement the initiative taken by the Department of Treasury through the Hardest Hit Fund to refurbish these communities? And secondly, do you have any recommendations as to how the fund can operate more effectively and efficiently?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you. Yes, we are working hand in hand with Treasury and with several of the departments, quite frankly. The blight issue is severe because a lot of those houses are used for criminal activity, and they promote disease as well. So the long-term cost of them is quite significant. And we're looking for ways to better use all the dollars and to more rapidly authorize the demolition of these kinds of facilities. There's been previously a lot of red tape involved in getting that done, and we're trying to reduce that very significantly so we can quickly move to take care of that problem.
Well, I'd like to help you to that extent, but the other part, obviously, is when these abandoned homes and become city property, they have to be boarded up. And so the boarding up is telltale sign to a criminal that here's a place that we can continue to our criminal activity, whatever that may be. And there's a clearboarding requirement that in lieu of plywood for vacant and abandoned properties that's been expanded across the nation through Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and the VA. And they've begun reimbursing them for the full cost of clearboarding, given it cost efficiency and its long-term benefits. Has your department done any recent assessments on the benefits of clearboarding technology in preserving vacant and abandoned homes?
I believe that is something that's being looked at, but I have not been given a full appraisal on that yet. We'll look into that.
Please, it is something that as you go through these neighborhoods, you'd have no idea which one is residence. Yes, thank you. Secondly, I'll move on quickly since I see I have a little bit of time remaining here. As you know, earlier this spring, our subcommittee had the pleasure of meeting with Inspector General Montoya. His testimony is insightful, and I appreciate the work both of you are doing to ensure that the efficient and proper use of our taxpayer dollars. I would like to raise the opportunity to follow up on an issue that he raised during the hearing that is of ongoing concern to me, and that's your HUD's human capital. A 2015 survey by HUD stated that fewer than half of the HUD employees have felt their training needs have been addressed. A July 2006 GAO report further echoed those findings. Can you please elaborate on the initiatives HUD is currently carrying out to better equip its employees, and has the department implemented a new strategy for its hiring authority to better target qualified candidates for employment?
Yes, our Department of Human Capital is in the process of being beefed up, so to speak, as are several of our departments. Many of the findings that Inspector General Montoya found, there are 11 material weaknesses, very, very legitimate. I've talked to him about them, and we're going to address all of them, but we want to really do it in a more holistic manner rather than just pinpoint things at a time. So we've hired a COO, because you need an operator. That's one of the things that I discovered in my many years in the corporate world. And we're going to be nominating a CFO and a CIO. And we'll be able to really merge our effort to solve each of those 11 material weaknesses.
Well, I wish you Godspeed to that end. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have no further questions at this time.
Thank you, sir. Congresswoman Clark, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being with us today. I was struck by some things in your testimony. One was your statement that we must be compassionate but wise, and also that as you're looking to reduce costs, you would assist current residents, encourage work, and promote self-sufficiency. So I'm hoping you can help me put together those goals. And with the 250,000 Section 8 vouchers that would be lost under this budget proposal. I'm sure you're aware the vast majority of rental assistance in this country goes to households that are composed of children, elderly, and the disabled. Yes. And by vast majority, I mean in Massachusetts, that is 90% of the households that receive federal rental assistance. In the chairman's home state of Florida, that's 91%. In the ranking member's home state of North Carolina, that's 92%. So a vulnerable population makes up overwhelmingly, closing in on 100% of the assistance recipients. And I want to tell you about a constituent in my district. She is 76 years old. She has a gross income from Social Security of $18,025 a year. She receives a $5,000 deduction for her medical expenses, which means under the current formula, using adjusted income, she pays $188 per month in rent. Under your reforms, she would pay $450 a month. That's an increase of over $3,100 a year, or 17% of her entire gross income. Never mind the vouchers that we're just going to lose, that every housing group, whether at home or nationally, has said there is absolutely no way attrition can make up for that. So how does this square? I've been thinking, like, how does this square with your statements about being compassionate and wise and taking care of our current residents and self-sufficiency? Mm-hmm. And when you say the pie needs to be bigger, I guess my question to you is that ultimately you are being held to constraints by this administration, that you are forced to make these sort of draconian and heartless cuts that are so damaging?
Well, it's a back and forth process to try to reach a compromise on where things should be. Obviously, you know, my goal is to use with the greatest efficiency anything that we have. As far as the specific example of the woman you gave, there are cutoffs in terms of the formula that is used so that people don't experience what you said she's going to experience. So I would, if that in fact is happening, there's a problem. And we also have hardship exemptions, particularly for the elderly and for the disabled.
I'm curious about that statement with the hardship waivers, because as these programs already don't have sufficient funding, they are serving the very lowest income people in our country. So the idea of a hardship waiver around that seems to beg the point. I just don't see the efficiency that we're gaining in this when we're cutting off 250,000 vouchers that are such a lifeline for such a vulnerable population.
Okay.
And if we're looking at that, you know, like building that path, as you said, to self-sufficiency, but then we're taking away the community development block grants, the choice program, the SHOP program, in fact, every incentive that helps create robust public-private partnerships. Where are those incentives in this budget?
Well, I do understand what you're saying and do recognize that we have carefully looked at who would be impacted to make sure that we did not displace any of those most vulnerable people. So
how are you going to choose who loses their voucher?
people who already have vouchers and who are already sheltered, when you talk about 250,000 people losing, you're talking about people who are on a waiting list. You're not talking about people who are already being sheltered. That's a different population.
Well, that's not my understanding from my housing communities, but I see my time has expired.
Thank you very much. Mr. Culberson, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for your service to the country.
Thank you.
I admire you immensely and the work that you've done throughout your life. Mr. Price, our ranking member, pointed out quite correctly that we need to have a more comprehensive approach to appropriations when we look at the federal budget. And I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about that bigger picture and the more comprehensive approach, because it's many of the folks in this panel have been talking about their concern about recommended reductions in different programs that do a great deal to help people that are most in need. And obviously, we have to have a safety net for people that are the most fragile and in need. But in order to do so, I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about the urgency of balancing the federal budget and the bigger problem, and that is that 70 cents out of every federal dollar that comes in, every one of our taxpayers' very precious, scarce, and hard-earned tax dollars, 70 cents immediately goes out the door to the automatic pilot mandatory spending programs, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the Affordable Care Act, Veterans Benefits, principal on the debt, and interest on the debt, which leaves the annual operating expenses of the federal government under the jurisdiction of appropriations 30 cents on the dollar. Yet 15 of that 30 cents has to goes to the Defense Department, which has been so badly underfunded that half of the Marine Corps planes, half of the Navy planes cannot fly for a lack of spare parts. 70% of our young men and women in the Marine Corps, the airplanes, 70% of their planes can't fly because of a lack of spare parts. We face great threats around the world. We're going to need to dramatically increase defense spending. So we are left with 15 cents on the dollar, and to try to spread around all the other vital functions of the federal government. You were very eloquent during the presidential campaign in talking about the urgency of balancing the federal budget. Would you talk to us a little bit about the need for members of Congress to be honest with our constituents and tell them how urgent it is that we rescue Medicare and Social Security for insolvency, and the amount of money that will free up while ensuring that Americans who paid into those programs receive the benefits that they've paid for?
Well, thank you. I can't tell you how refreshing it is to know that somebody actually cares about this. I mean, $20 trillion in national debt, just back it back up to $18 trillion. If you tried to pay that off at a rate of $10 million a day, 365 days a year, it would take over 5,000 years. And this is what we're putting on the backs of our citizens. Every of those thousands of babies that are born today, will come with a debt of $60,000 on their head. This does not go away. This is there. So, you know, we have to work within that reality. Almost every society had an opportunity to do this. You go back to 17th century Spain, 18th century France, 19th century Great Britain, ancient Egypt, ancient Rome. Every one of them knew that there was a problem. They did nothing about it, and they collapsed. Are we going to face the same thing, or are we going to be smart enough to learn from their examples? And again, I want to emphasize the programs that we're talking about, the things that have been done, they're wonderful things. And, you know, if we had the funding, we should do them all. We should do them, take care of everybody. It would be a wonderful thing. But we can't. Therefore, we have to do the most responsible things that we can do. And we have to try to lay the groundwork for, you know, economic growth and to be able to take care of people. If we destroy these programs because we're fiscally irresponsible, we won't be able to take care of anybody.
Absolutely. And is it possible, logically, to even begin to balance the budget by only looking at 15 cents on every federal dollar?
I don't think so.
It's impossible. So I really welcome the help of my Democrat colleagues. I know my Republican colleagues are committed to balancing the budget, to paying off that national debt, which is a terrible thing to pass on to our children and grandchildren.
But we can still do it if we start now.
If we start right now. Right. People who are 45 years of age or younger, Social Security will not be there for them. If you're 54 years of age or younger, Mr. Secretary, the Medicare Hospital Fund can only pay 50 cents on the dollar. Right. These are hard realities that we in Congress, the Republican majority, this is why I believe Donald Trump was elected, because people are sick and tired of the debt, the deficit, the inaction, the refusal of the Congress and the President to deal with reality. The country expects us to get her done and balance the budget and accomplish these things so that you have the money that you need to take care of the most vulnerable and fragile in our society. Would you agree?
I would agree, and I thank you for your willingness to talk about it. I think a lot of people of your colleagues actually understand this, but it's not a popular thing to say.
Thank you, Mr. Culberson. Mr. Young.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Carson, thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
I'm just going to ask you have a conversation with you. There's a lot of challenges that you're going to be facing with this department. You've probably already realized a lot of that.
Yes.
Why did you accept this job?
Well, you know, I spent my entire professional career trying to give children a second chance, only to see many of them go back into an environment that was not healthy. And this is an opportunity to try to do everything I can to improve that environment for them. So it's a continuation of my work.
Do you have some, just a handful of real goals that you want to accomplish with this department to leave it, not necessarily as a legacy with your name on it, but when we're talking about the people that are impacted within the programs of this department,
yes.
What kind of goals do you have for them?
Well, the real goals for me are to recognize that our people, all of them, are human capital. And when it comes to our nation in the future, we have to compete with China and India, nations that have 3 to 4 times as many people as we do, which means if we don't develop our people, we will not be able to compete into the future. So I want to see us take a much more holistic look at the problems that we have rather than pinpointing things and having our little special groups. We need to take a holistic view of America and what we must do in order to stay strong into the future.
And speaking of America, I urge you to spend as much time as possible outside of the district, being on the ground in our neighborhoods, in our communities, not just in urban areas, but as well as some of our very rural areas. Absolutely. I represent a district that's very rural, very urban at the same time. I represent Des Moines and then 16 very rural counties, parts of those. And so with the challenges, though, that you have, there's 2 things that I think could be a hurdle, but if you hire the right people and have the right accountability, I'm hoping that you can get to where you want to get. And you talked about hiring a chief information officer and a chief financial officer. We've had some hearings in this committee when we've had the inspector general before us. and talking about the real challenges with the different networks, technology networks and systems that you have at HUD.
Yes.
And if some of them went down, there wouldn't be anybody who was trained to replace some of the parts, or that software wouldn't even be available today. And also really getting a grasp on the financial management of the department as well. I hope you make those, really challenge your employees to make those some goals, just so that the department can run better. And also, we got to have accountability for the taxpayer.
Yes.
Make sure that the hardworking folks in America, the taxpayer dollars they send out here, they're used in a good manner.
That is a huge goal. Basically, to run it like a business. And, you know, I've spent, 18 years on Kellogg's board and 16 years on Costco's board, as well as started a national nonprofit, and have had, despite what the media would tell you, a great deal of experience in business and how to do things. And I have already seen enormous savings that can be realized by doing things in a rational way.
Well, I want you to know that many of us here on the committee, we want to work with you for the benefit of the American people.
Thank you.
And to help those who are struggling to get that opportunity to just reach that higher ladder of self-worth and an economic ladder as well, and to be able to give back to this great country someday.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Valadao.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Secretary, for your time today and your testimony. In your testimony, you highlighted that HUD is weighed down by too much bureaucracy and unnecessary regulations. This is evident in my district, where a public housing agency was awarded a grant of over $3 million last December. 6 months have passed since the announcement of this award, and the agency is still yet to see those funds. How are you proposing to reduce regulations and bureaucracy in order to ensure your department is able to appropriately and efficiently direct these funds to the individuals who are desperately in need?
Thank you so much for that question. That has been a pet peeve of mine for a long time, bureaucracy. And, I define bureaucracy as people who care more about the rules than the goals. But we have appointed a task force, as has been asked for by the President in Executive Order 13777. And we're looking at every single regulation. And also, we have open comment period. And during my national tour, which will be continuing, listening particularly to our local HUD employees and to the people who administer the programs, finding out from them what are the things that keep you from being able to move efficiently and effectively, and dealing with those directly.
All right, and then in my district has many small communities with a very limited tax base. These communities depend on federal community development funding for housing, infrastructure, community facilities. For example, in incorporated areas like Delray, Early Mart, Rich Grove, and Lamont, all within my district there in California, developers of affordable rental housing utilize a combination of funding sources in addition to the private equity they raise through the low-income housing tax credit, especially in small towns and rural areas. Very often, these include key HUD funding programs like Home and Community Development Block Grant. And I know that you touched on it a little bit earlier with the Chairman's questions, but I didn't really hear a substitute. So I'd like to know what your substitute what do you propose to keep these projects viable for low and very low-income wage earners?
Okay. Well, first of all, keep in mind that many of those projects that have been set in motion through some of those grants will be continuing. The CDBG funding is not really meant to take care of the debt service. It's more like collateral. And the effect of those projects will extend, in many cases, for decades, and will generate funds which can then be used for the debt service. But in terms of the public-private partnerships, the use of things like low-income tax credits, we are working with the Treasury Department and across multiple silos to make sure that no matter how we end up, we will have programs that encourage the public-private partnerships, because there's so much more money in the private sector than there is in the government, particularly considering the conversation that we just had about national debt.
Since I've got time for just one more, HUD is tasked with supporting housing needs across America in urban, suburban, and rural communities alike. However, the previous administration and federal policymakers in Congress often overlook the needs of rural America, including the rural communities like my district, and many of those represented up here. How much of HUD's funding goes towards supporting housing needs, specifically in rural communities, and how can HUD programs be improved to make the most of those funds and ensure consistent and practical support is provided to rural communities?
Well, obviously, we're very concerned about the rural communities and are working with the Agriculture Department. We have combined programs to deal with housing needs in the rural communities. But the other thing about the rural communities I think is incredibly important is the use of internet. In many cases, it's non-existent. I went into a lot of places when I was campaigning. I was absolutely shocked about the communication. And of course, that makes a big difference for the opportunities that are available for those young people. And now that we've reached a point in our society where a lot of work can be done from home, it makes it even more important. So yes, we are paying attention to that very much.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate you bringing up the internet too. So thank you, Chairman. My time is up.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Secretary, last summer HUD began allowing FHA to insure mortgages on properties with what is known as PACE loans, property accessed clean energy loans on them, which potentially puts them in a, well, it actually puts them in a second lien position.
Yes.
The second lien position potentially increases the risk for the MMI funds and taxpayers. Now, the MMI fund was forced to draw, I've got it here, $1.7 billion from Treasury 4 years ago to cover the projected losses on loans that it guarantees, and it reached its statutory reserve level just 2 years ago. The Federal Housing Finance Agency prohibits Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac from insuring properties with PACE loans. Do you believe, Mr. Secretary, that a second lien position actually could create a greater risk to the MMI fund and to taxpayers?
Well, I think it's a potential problem, and one that I've had a number of conversations with some of your colleagues in Congress, and one which we're looking at very carefully. A lot of the a lot of the people who get involved in those PACE loans don't really understand them. They don't understand what they're getting involved with. And at the very least, there has to be mandatory counseling before someone gets into something like that. But it does create real problems.
And so you're going to be looking, I'm assuming and I'm hoping that you're going to be reevaluating the policy?
Absolutely.
Great. And I don't know if you've had a chance to see there's a bill, the PACE Act, Protecting Americans from Credit Exploitation, which it.
Yes.
All right. So you're looking at that as well?
Yes.
Great. I'm glad to hear that, Mr. Secretary. Let me change the subject. Over 7.5 million Americans depend on either public housing or private vouchers to afford a place to live. And I'm speaking quickly. I always speak quickly, and I'm doing it quicker now because I've got a lot of questions. And obviously helping these people remain in stable housing is one of HUD's fundamental commitments. And so I appreciate you taking a hard look at these programs, Mr. Secretary. We obviously have to do everything that we can to address unnecessary costs. You've spoken about that. The budget requests a broad authority to provide waivers and other flexibilities to the PHAs, Public Housing Authorities, to cut costs. Can you provide some specifics on what some of these flexibilities might mean and how much potentially they could save?
Well, you know, the PHAs right now have their hands tied when it comes to operating funds versus capital funds. If they just had the ability to shift money from one to the other as needed, it would take care of a lot of the problems that they have, that one thing.
And I know that you've visited a lot of locals, and so I'm assuming that you've gotten some feedback, potentially some good feedback, right, as to some of the things that they need to be helpful.
It's been actually quite wonderful to sit not only with the HUD employees, and most HUD employees are outside of Washington, D.C., by the way, but also to talk with the tenants, the beneficiaries. And one of the things that's been very enlightening is that those communities that have tenant associations tend to do much better, tend to work much better with the people who manage, and tend to have a much higher quality of life. So we're encouraging the establishment of those in all of the units.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I don't have a lot of time, and so I had a question which I'm going to have to kind of reword.
Okay.
The issue of what is known as negative rent payments, which, you know, some people say that it's, well, it's, you know, you're paying people to live in public housing, but I would tell you that obviously I believe that, you know, certain costs like electricity, et cetera, those are real costs. And so I know that your budget makes some proposals, and I just look forward to working with you because I believe we should probably not be treating folks whose utilities are not paid and in HUD programs differently differently than those that are, because obviously those are real costs. And I just
Sure.
I had some questions, but I just wanted to throw that your way as an issue of concern and something that I look forward to continuing to work
It's
with
a
you.
big issue of concern for a lot of the tenants also, and people who are on the waiting list and who are looking for some equity and some fairness. So I'm look forward to working with you to make sure that we do things in a fair and equitable way.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. One of the reasons I get such great cooperation from one of the members of the subcommittee to keeping on time, because I try to do the same thing. So anyways, Mr. Price.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Secretary, you've referred to your listening tour. Glad to see you doing that, going around the country to communities and HUD field offices. I know you went to your native Detroit, went to Jacksonville, Miami, Columbus, Ohio, other places. You've said some things along the way, and I want to ask you about how they relate to this budget proposal. You said you want a housing policy that delivers more bang for the buck, partly by encouraging, leveraging more state and local support as well as private sector investment. You also have spoken often of partnerships, one of the best tools we have to revitalize communities, public-private partnerships, partnerships among levels of government. And I must say that's music to our ears in the Research Triangle area of North Carolina. That's been our stock in trade. I'm not sure the notion of partnership, though, and of leveraging is borne out by this budget. And so I do want to ask you, on your tour, did anybody suggest that it was a good idea to totally eliminate the seed money? Did anybody suggest it was a good idea to totally eliminate community development block grants, for example? Or did anybody suggest that we should get rid of the home program? Or did anyone suggest we should get rid of the SHOP program? You know, it's one thing to have federal seed money. It's one thing to make sure federal money leverages other money. But how does that work if the federal money is totally eliminated?
Well, the federal
Then let me just zero in a little bit more on SHOP, because it's been mentioned here this morning. One example of the kind of partnership, presumably, that you're talking about is the kind of work we do with Habitat for Humanity. The first time, I'm sure you don't remember this, first time I met you was in Raleigh, North Carolina, at a meeting involving Habitat for Humanity. There are 3 pillars for Habitat. 3 sources of the partnership that the federal government has with Habitat: CDBG, which often does the infrastructure for these communities, SHOP, and the Section 4 capacity building. Every one of those programs is eliminated in this budget. So did anyone suggest that? Did anyone suggest that that is the way to effective a kind of catalytic role for the federal government?
What has been suggested in all of these places that I go is that we do everything that we can to facilitate the public-private partnerships, and working across silos with other departments, including Treasury, we're looking for ways to do that. I very much believe in Habitat for Humanity. I very much believe in self-sufficiency. But there are ways to do that, and we're going to be working on those ways.
Well, the Habitat folks that I'm talking to are just baffled by this. Because you know what else this budget does is eliminate AmeriCorps. Who do you think organizes those Saturday morning bills that bring all these volunteers in and make sure that goes in an orderly way? AmeriCorps, National Service. I just don't get it. I certainly get the idea of partnership and seed money. I mean, that's really the best way to spend federal funds, not just total federal financing of these efforts. But when you totally remove the core funding, that just seems like a formula for making these things go away.
Well, do keep in mind that there's billions of dollars in the pipeline already in these programs as we work on ways to effectively and efficiently utilize the money, and with the principle in mind that public-private partnerships are the way to go. So that is all on the plate for things that we're proceeding to do.
Well, presumably that means future budgets would not be as destructive in this respect. I just have a minute left here, but you know, you've talked about hard choices. You've talked about the kind of things we want to give more emphasis to, knowing we can't do everything. But I, for the life of me, don't see what is strengthened in this budget. One thing I thought we might see would be, for example, bringing back the kinds of partnerships we used to have with religious communities. My district is peppered with 202 housing for the elderly, St. Joseph's AME in Durham, First Baptist in Chapel Hill, Cosmopolitan Baptist in Raleigh. These are congregations that took on the formation of an NGO and worked with HUD to build rental housing for the elderly, and those are wonderful communities. Is that the sort of thing you might want to bring back? I mean, what are we strengthening in this budget?
Well, you know, there are probably a lot of things that you don't see in the budget that don't necessarily reflect what we're going to be doing.
That's why I'm asking you.
You know, for instance,
Mr. Secretary, I'm going to have to, and I apologize, but I'm going to have to cut both of you off.
Okay.
But we'll hopefully get back to that. Mr. Valdale.
Mr. Secretary, the Inspector General states that your key management and performance challenges are so interconnected that it is difficult to remedy one without first correcting the other. One significant challenge is to establish and implement effective and required financial management governance. HUD has not had a clean opinion on its financial statements in 3 years, and HUD has not had a CFO for 2 years running. Financial leadership starts at the top. Where are you in the process of filling the CFO position you mentioned earlier? And can you give us a timetable of when you expect to have a CFO?
Yes. Obviously, addressing these issues, as I said before, holistically is important, and you have to have a CFO in order to do that, because many of the material weaknesses dealt with financial weaknesses. We have been doing a diligent search, looking for people who are highly qualified. We have a number of them, and we're just in the process right now of paring that list down and presenting it to Congress.
The IG has noted that HUD's key financial staff do not have the appropriate skills or background to oversee the financial statements. The most significant example was rounding to the nearest billion or 100 billion in the fiscal year 2016 financial statements. What is your plan to address the lack of financial knowledge at HUD, and how will you ensure that you are hiring people with the right skill sets?
We've already addressed that issue. We're already staffing up with the people who have the requisite knowledge to deal with that. That's been a big concern of mine from the first week I was there.
All right. And then there are nonprofits in my district that provide a variety of homeownership services to low and moderate income home buyers, including housing, counseling, and education, purchase and resale of HUD homes, providing essential secondary financing to enable families to purchase their first home in a sustainable fashion. These nonprofits provide a valuable service by building stable homeowners who become an important part of the infrastructure in their communities. Routinely, these nonprofits complain about the onerous nature of the HUD certification process to provide such services, creating bureaucratic and sometimes invasive oversight that adds costs and complications to the organizations who should actually be treated as trusted partners. What will you do to streamline such processes?
We have recently undertaken a comprehensive program to review that very issue. and are making very significant and rapid progress on that. There's 2,100 such organizations around the country. We're looking at that and moving rapidly.
All right, thank you. And Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Quigley, you're recognized, sir.
Thanks again. Thanks again, Ms. Secretary. Let's talk about something that doesn't cost any money.
All right.
Complying with existing law, rules, and regulations. When Senator Brown asked you a question during the confirmation process, she asked if you believe that HUD currently provides, and I'll quote, extra rights to the LGBTQ people, I'm quoting, that need to be withdrawn. I believe your answer was that you did not. But either in the last couple weeks or months, the department has purged at least 6 documents that involve training to emergency shelters and other housing that keep particularly sensitive teenagers, transgender teenagers from getting kicked out on the street, how to comply with these things. The timing seems odd, and why would they be removed without being replaced with substantially the same, if you felt they needed to be better or something, materials?
Well, you may be referring to the survey that was pulled back dealing with LGBT youth homelessness.
No, I'm sure this is just training materials given to these facilities so that the staff at the emergency shelters and the housing facilities can make sure that they're not discriminating against LGBTQ and particularly transgender youth.
We have a policy of making sure that no one is discriminated against, and are looking at all of our policies across the board for everybody when it comes to discrimination.
Well, not everybody's discriminated against. There are particular groups that have been discriminated against more than others, obviously, and that's why you have the training materials. That's why you have these materials available so that these shelters can comply with the rules. So why would you remove anything if your goal is not to discriminate against anyone?
The only reason that we would remove anything is so that we can look at it and determine whether it's effective in term. And some of the things we have discovered were not effective and were not providing good data. We want to make all of our decisions based on evidence, not on ideology.
I go back to my original point, though. If these shelters, if these facilities need to know how to comply, just removing the existing instructions doesn't help. I mean, at the best of circumstance, when would you tell me that are they going to be replaced, and are they going to be designed to protect LGBTQ?
All of the policies will be designed to protect LGBTQ and everybody else.
Why would you remove these and not replace them at the same time, or at least wait until you've got a suitable replacement, if indeed there is a suitable replacement?
As I've said, if anything has been removed, it's being removed in order to be looked at and improved.
And what would your timeline be to be replaced?
Well, I need a specific...
On those 6 materials that were purged from the website?
As soon as possible.
Well, I guess the bigger picture here, no one's really gotten into it. Your discussion, and I guess maybe this is germane, of poverty, and I'm sure your words were different, being a state of mind. Let me just ask, if your sense of poverty being a state of mind applies to particular groups or excludes particular groups, given that about 14.5 million Americans live in poverty that are under the age of 18, and about 10%, 4.2 million, are over the age of 65. Would you, and clearly those are all groups that live in CHA housing, would those be included in those where poverty is a state of mind?
Well, I appreciate you asking that question, because first of all, I said partly. Okay. So it's a part
I'll let you
of the state of mind. And
draw the parameters.
And secondly, recognize that the human brain is extraordinarily complex, and it is programmed throughout the course of a person's life. And that programming determines how a person faces things. For instance, if you're a minor league baseball player, you come up first time at bat and you see Nolan Ryan, you say, oh no, Nolan Ryan, he's got a 100-mile-an-hour fastball, I'm probably never going to even see the ball. You're probably going to approach it differently than another minor leaguer who comes up and says, Nolan Ryan, he's an old man, I'm going to knock the cover off this ball. So the way that one approaches things makes a very big difference, and I think everybody knows that. Some people always take advantage of a situation to distort the meaning. But the fact of the matter is, America is a very special place. And I know there was a New York Times article last week that said, it's just the other way around in terms of the mindset, and that America is the most difficult place for anybody to arise. And if that were the case, why would so many people be risking life and limb to get here? We have something very special. We need to preserve it. And the can-do attitude is a big part of what made America a great
Let me, on that note, and Mr. Quigley, I hate to interrupt you, but I think we should have time for another quick round. And so, Mr. Dents.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Secretary. You didn't get a chance to give me your blockbuster answer that you said you were going to give me on housing counseling. On the question that I had posed to you earlier, we were talking about how housing counseling assistance was important, and that obviously there's still a demonstrated need for services, particularly for people before they buy homes. But you were going to give me an answer because I mentioned level funding, for the housing counseling assistance program, and feel free to answer.
Well, I think I've already answered it with one of your colleagues, but we have placed an enormous amount of emphasis on that, recognizing that, there used to be a time when people in this country actually knew about housing. Everybody, when I was a kid growing up, knew that you don't pay more than 2.5 times your annual income for a house. That kind of information has been lost, and that makes counseling ever more important at this time. So we have concentrated a great deal of effort on all of those housing counseling centers, all 2,100 of them, to try to bring consistency and to educate the people who are actually doing the counseling. But also, we're looking at the use of the internet to create tutorials for people, because it has to be done at different levels. People operate at so many different levels in this country, and the average American operates at about the 8th to 9th grade level. But a lot of the material isn't at that level, so we need to have it at various levels so people can use it at their own pace, in addition to taking advantage of the housing counselors.
Well, thank you. I've seen some real value to the housing counseling programs in my community. I saw it during the financial crisis, and I've seen it since, so I just wanted to put a plug in for that. And I'm just going to return to another issue that the Chairman Friedlingheisen had discussed as it related to the VASH program, the HUD Veterans Supporting Housing Program. My staff tells me that these programs have been very effective in reducing homelessness among veterans. In fact, in my community, we have a street medicine program, which you might actually find interesting, run by one of the hospitals, where we actually go out in the streets with medical professionals. And, I just out in the streets, down by the railroad tracks, along the river, where people are living. And really impressive program. And it's not just treating veterans, but all sorts of folks.
No, I've seen it.
Yeah, and well, I invite you to come up to our community in Allentown. It's really impressive.
Can I do neurosurgery on the street?
Well, I would never try to tell you where you can or cannot do surgery, doctor. So my main question, I guess, is the budget request seeks additional support, as you know, for the HUD VASH program. If HUD awards all of the potential new vouchers, I believe the HUD VASH program would be supporting a total of approximately 93,000 vouchers as of late 2017.
That's correct.
And then the VA can't move forward with providing social services for veterans housed with HUD VASH vouchers until in 2018 without new HUD vouchers. The budget request appears to propose stopping the issuance of the new HUD VASH vouchers. And as you know, these vouchers are used to provide rental assistance for homeless veterans, along with case management, clinical services provided by the VA at their medical centers and clinics. Should I assume from your budget request that you intend to support the 93,000 vouchers that will be in place at the end of this year, but that you don't intend to add additional vouchers in the coming year?
All the vouchers will be supported. As you correctly mentioned, there's about 90,000, a little under that. About 8,000 of those are not being utilized, and the $40 million that was added in the 17 budget brings that to 13,000. That's an adequate number to take care of the needs currently, but this has been a very important alliance between the Veterans Administration and HUD, and we feel extremely strongly about this. Recognize that the HUD VASH program has been at the leading edge of what's responsible for reducing homelessness in veterans by 47%. That's not good enough, obviously. We want to get it to 0%, but we'll continue to work on that.
So I'll take that answer as a yes.
Yes,
to the question. And,
absolutely.
And if you'd like to elaborate further on your rationale for the, what appears to be cuts to the HUD VASH program and your plans to assist the homeless veterans population, feel free.
We will always provide what is necessary, but as I said, we've got 13,000 unused vouchers at this stage.
Okay, thank you. I'll yield back.
Thank you, sir. Thank you,
7
Mr.
seconds,
Secretary.
go.
And Ms. Clark, you're
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, you have said you're particularly interested in creating healthy houses and healthy homes. In 2010, your department estimated nationwide there was a deferred maintenance backlog of $26 billion, and that was going to grow $3.4 billion a year. But in this budget, you're proposing to cut funding to address this maintenance backlog by a combined $1.8 billion. Practically speaking, these cuts are really going to harm efforts that are underway to not only modernize but address existing health hazards. One example that has been getting some press recently are the Red Hook houses in New York, where the mold levels, the asthma rates are 3 times that of surrounding communities. How is the New York City Housing Authority and around the country, how are we going to remediate that particular health hazard and maintain our public housing with these funding cuts?
Thank you. It's a very good question. The Rental Assistance Demonstration Program has been able to leverage federal dollars and bring in an additional $4 billion recently. And if we lift the cap on that RAD program and allow it to expand even further, the incentives are already there to bring in those public-private partnerships. We find that those are remediating these kinds of problems much faster than the capital funds ever did.
So is that the solution that you see, expansion of the RAD, lifting the $185,000 cap? Because
that appears to be working.
One of my concerns is that I think that RAD has been a valuable option. It certainly has been in Cambridge housing in my district. They've taken advantage of it. But I've never seen it used without having corresponding CDBG funds, ever. Do you have an example where that's ever happened?
I can supply you with some examples for that. We can send them over to you.
That would be great because, it is of grave concern that these programs work as an ecosystem. Yeah. And as we take out CDBG, if we take out SHOP, home, the home program alone, every dollar leverages $4.20 in local and private funds.
You're speaking to the choir on that, and we would never do anything to harm what we see as something that is the solution. The solution is the public-private partnerships, and we are going to be working assiduously to make sure that we actually expand on those, regardless.
So then why are you eliminating them?
Regardless of under what name we do it.
Well, I'm getting more puzzled as we go. If you agree, and I'm preaching to the choir, why are you wholesale eliminating home, choice, SHOP, I'm confused.
Again, go back to my initial statement. We have a certain amount of pie, and we have a number of people who are very much dependent on a large portion of that pie in order to stay sheltered. If we do some peripheral things, a lot of those people will lose their housing.
So I think this brings me back to the discussion you were having around the deficit. The best way to address the deficit and the best way to, is to build a robust economy.
Right.
And to make sure that we are getting people to work and that we are investing. But that comes with investments. And as I look across this entire administration's budget, we're seeing dramatic cuts in work training programs. We just met with Secretary of Labor yesterday, in apprenticeships, in vocational schools and career and technical education, after-school programs, college affordability, student loans. This budget as a whole is a recipe for killing our economy. And when you're saying, I get the importance of leveraging private dollars to help us solve our housing crisis, but you're taking away all the incentives necessary to leverage those dollars, I am baffled at how you think this is going to work.
I think it depends on which set of data you want to look at in terms of what's happening with the economy, whether it's improving or whether it's getting worse.
Well, there will be no pipeline of ideas, innovation, or an educated workforce if we put this budget in place. And I think we can look at any data that we want, and you will find that that's the dangerous truth for the American people with your budget and the rest of the administration's budget.
Well, the only thing I can assure you is that we are going to work extremely hard to use every dollar in this budget to get the biggest bang for the buck, and we're happy to work with all of you to make sure that that happens.
Thank you. We do not have a lot of time, so let's, what I would like to do then, Mr. Price, is I'm going to be very brief. We'll go to you, and maybe with that, we end it. Is that all right? Ms. Clark? Okay. Mr. Secretary, again, since I don't have a lot of time, let me talk. This committee has been really supportive of HUD's performance-based focus on homeless assistance programs. As I'm sure you know, the department shifted its emphasis from transitional housing approach to a housing-first approach. And by the way, I need to thank some of your team, your staff, who have worked with, for example, Miami providers, and you were there.
Right.
And I think some great progress has been made. But it goes without saying that this shift, there's some growing pains, and some folks in some areas have been hit. We recognize that in our 2017 bill and provide resources to communities that lost some funding through this approach. And I don't know, I don't expect you have it with you, but it'd be great if you can provide us with a status of additional emergency solution grant funding provided in of that 2017 funding for communities that lost funding in the grant application. You know, the status of some of that, it would be great. And I don't know if you would happen to have it there. I doubt it. But if not, if you can
I
get
don't
that
have
to
it
us.
with me
All
at
right.
this moment.
Any idea of how you would envision some of those resources would be used to move homeless providers towards more performance-driven programs? Because that's key to get, performance is key.
Well, homelessness is a big issue. Over the last few years, it's gone from 800,000 to just over 500,000. So, a lot of progress has been made in that area. And a lot of the things that we have been doing have helped with that. But it's an interagency issue, and there's been a lot of private people who've been interested in it too. I think the whole housing first concept is a good concept in the sense that if you leave somebody sleeping out under the bridge, they're going to end up in the emergency room, frequently end up getting admitted. A week of admission costs more than a year of shelter. We have to, look at the numbers and do things wisely for that reason. But I don't think we should stop at housing first. We should then move on to housing second and housing third. Housing second is diagnosing why they're in that condition, and And third is treating it. Because if we truly want to be compassionate, then we do everything we can to put people back on their feet.
Mr. Secretary, I wanted to bring up, and again, I'm sensitive to the time constraints. I have some concerns about the budget, the reduction of funds for homeless assistance grants, but it's something that we'll have ample opportunity to speak about in the future. And with that, and thanking everybody for being cooperating with me on the time issues, let me recognize the ranking member to finish up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I do want to give you a chance to finish your answer if there's more to say beyond what you said in response to other members about what the positive side of these hard choices looks like. In other words, that hard choices are being made, it implies that some things are being cut, but others are being strengthened, that there are trade-offs. I don't see much other than just indiscriminate meat axe cutting, to tell you the truth. And we were talking about maybe some things that were not immediately evident just from the budget numbers. So I'm going to give you a chance to respond on that. I also want to say something, though, about the broader budget situation we face and what I would think is a kind of all-purpose explanation we want to avoid. We know that we need to get our country's fiscal house in order. And most people, I think, know that requires a comprehensive approach. We have two examples from the 1990s about balancing the budget, about paying off a good chunk of the national debt. It's not too hard to know how that was achieved, but it did involve some political pain. It involved some tax increases. It involved some entitlement reductions, and it involved discipline and discretionary spending. We, for reasons that are very well known, can't seem to get back to that today. But I tell you, just simply saying we're under fiscal constraints and we simply have to whack away at the discretionary domestic budget, there are two things wrong with that. It's the worst of both worlds. Number one, you will never balance the budget that way. We could eliminate your budget entirely and still have a fiscal problem. So it's fraudulent as a formula for achieving fiscal discipline. And number two, it's destructive in terms of the things a great country must do to build its economy and to build its future. It's a formula for disinvestment across the entire federal government. So worst of both worlds. And it gives us the budget that's before us today. So I'll take a backseat to no one in terms of wanting to confront that larger fiscal picture. But I do not accept that the HUD budget before us is a necessary product of fiscal responsibility. Far from it. It really is a disinvestment budget without redeeming features that are evident to me. I hope we can do better. I hope we can work with you and with the administration to, first of all, get the overall budget numbers in a better place, and then within those numbers write a housing bill that really addresses our country's needs. But okay. You were cut off in mid-answer, and I want to give you a chance
Sure.
to give us a little more, a glimmer of hope, if you will.
Well, tell us how you really feel about it. But now, I was saying that there are some things that aren't in the budget that are very important. For instance, the concept of our vision/opportunity centers that we want to put in the proximity of all public housing. And these are places usually that are boarded up right now, but the buildings will be repurposed, and we'll be putting into them people who can help the people have a vision about what actually goes on in the world. If you go to a lot of disadvantaged communities, you ask the kids, what do you want to do when you grow up? You get about 5 answers, but there's 1,000. We need somebody to expose them to the other 995 and talk about how to get there. We need to have daycare. And the reason that is so important is because a lot of women who have babies out of wedlock, their education stopped at that first baby. And they need a safe place to put that baby so they can get their GED or their associate's degree or their bachelor's or their master's and learn how to take care of themselves and, more importantly, teach that to their children. That's the only way you break those cycles. And also mentorship programs been demonstrated to have a profound positive effect in terms of people being able to finish high school. Why is that important? You look at the Brookings study on poverty. It said that there were 3 things that a person could do that would reduce their likelihood of living in poverty to 2% or less. Number 1, finish high school. Number 2, get married. Number 3, wait until you're married to have children. So things that we can do to sort of address the data, not the ideology, so that we can get people moving in the right direction. Those are things that will be sponsored completely by the private sector. I've already talked to people in the business world. They're very happy to sponsor these, just like you sponsor stadiums all over the country, because we live in a country of people who actually are very compassionate. And it's been very different from other parts of the world, and we need to take advantage of that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Secretary, again, let me first thank you for your time and your staff. I would ask the Secretary to, the committee staff will be in contact with your budget officer regarding questions for the record. I know that I have some questions, and I know that other members will also submit those questions as well. If you would please ask OMB to return the information for the record to the subcommittee within 30 days from Friday, that would allow us to publish the transcripts of today's hearings and make obviously informed decisions when we're crafting fiscal year 2018. Mr. Secretary, as you saw today, you have in this subcommittee folks who are knowledgeable and interested on these issues, and frankly, to a great degree, even to the details. And I know you've had the opportunity to see that. And obviously, it's also clear that a lot of us, including I, have a lot of concerns about and disagreements with your budget, but there is no disagreement or concern on my part as to why it is that you're doing what you're doing and your service to the country. And so that makes me feel good. I'm comforted the fact that you have volunteered for this job, and we know that it's a very difficult job, and the fact that you're giving up a lot to do this. So just know that I think all of us look forward to working very closely with you.
It's going to be a pleasure to work with all of you. I appreciate
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Price, any closing thoughts?
No, thank you, Mr. Secretary, Mr. Chairman. Look forward to the weeks ahead. We have some serious challenges, so we're ready to take them on.
it. Amen.
Thank you. With that, the meeting is adjourned.